It's the final word story time, number 188. That's right. A milestone starts to draw into view. Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins with you. The show brought to you by Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City. Both of them, not just one of them, both of them, either of them. You can go to one and then the other to balance things up. You can get the final word ad-free feed on our Patreon page. That is a thing you can now do if you want it. That is in your hands. The ball, I won't say the ball's in your court because it's a cricket show. Wouldn't make any sense. Can't talk about other sports on a cricket show. It's against the law. Now, story time. Here we go. We've had a busy month on story time. We've been doing doubles for the last few weekends in order to catch up on some numbers on the feed. We'll be back to singles through the T20 World Cup because that would be unrealistic to try to continue that pace and unnecessary for everybody. For us, for you, nobody needs more than one a week through the next 4 weeks. I believe you would agree, Adam Collins.
I do agree with that. It's been worth doing through, I say the quieter months. What I really might mean by that is when the IPL's on. When the IPL's on, we have a slightly different rhythm to the show. We can do other things, and that has led itself to a couple of story times a week. But now we shift into the busier part of the year. You neglected to say story time 188. Let's go the Gary Kirsten show. The Gary Kirsten 188 not out.
Could do.
From against the UAE when he broke the world record. I think I'm right in saying. I get a bit confused about where Saeed Anwar, Gary Kirsten.
He gets there. Saeed Anwar's 94. Is Gary Kirsten
94
after that?
Yeah, Gary Kirsten's certainly 96 World Cup. That much I do know, and the Saeed Anwar innings.
It's after Saeed Anwar. Yeah.
Everything before
he doesn't quite
200.
get there. I think it's like he might. Yeah. They think he might do it that day, and it doesn't quite happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then Charles Coventry makes the 194 to equal it up.
Right. Yes.
But nobody goes past it until Sachin.
And there's also Dennis Amos 188, which we talked about when we interviewed him this time last year around his 80th birthday. So that was a nice thing we did during last year's IPL. I was going to say hiatus. It's not a hiatus. It's just a different type of energy of the show. But yes,
well, it's a less daily. And can I say our double story times we would not have got through it without our research crew. So thank you to all of the researchers who are involved with getting the extra shows on the table. We love you very much.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, they have provided us with the support we required to get the show on the road or in the podcast feed, which has been terrific. Before we get into the new numbers we're going to do today, I've got a couple of things to tell you about, Jeff. One is about our Final Word patron member, our international cricketer among our ranks, Gimblett, who we've referenced on the show. Indeed, we've had him on the show, haven't we, when he made his debut for Hungary a couple of years ago now. Might have been 2022, I reckon. Now, there's been a bit going on here. He played for Hungary in a Continental Cup tournament that was duked out over the last couple of weeks, right, in Hungary. So it was a home tournament, and they've won it, which is great. They beat Gibraltar in the final, which was the catalyst for him getting in touch with me because, of course, it was only a few weeks ago that I had the great pleasure of playing against that same side for the MCC over there. But this was a tournament that had a lot more riding on it for them, clearly, because it was an international, except that it wasn't. So Gabor's got one cap when he executed a run out against Bulgaria, I'm pretty sure it was, in 2022. It was a terribly exciting story, tremendously exciting story. Now, he's played in this comp. He's played 4 games for his country. However...
Would you say he's played 4 T20s international?
4 T20s international, that's right, which would make 5 T20s international all up. However, if you want context on that, go back to the weekly show. All the other games in the comp were recognised as T20Is, with the exception of the games that Hungary played in, because there was an administrative error. The squad they sent through to the ICC contained a couple of players who hadn't been in the country for the right amount of time in the last 12 months or something like that. There's some like in-country requirement, which 2 squad members, they weren't like instrumental to the starting 11, but they were part of the wider squad, had not, based on what I can see in the scorecards anyway, had not met that eligibility criteria. So the ICC have knocked them back. So for Gabor specifically, he would otherwise have 5 T20Is. Now he's got 1, and now he's 42. It's unclear, when he'll get his next chance. But they did win the tournament. It's just, an honest mistake with the paperwork by the sounds of things, and the players didn't know. It also deprives the guys they played against of T20I caps as well. So I don't know. I wonder whether there's I mean, look, this is coming in the same week where the what's the comp called in America, Jeff? The T20 tournament, the Major League Cricket. Major League Cricket has been granted T20 status this week, despite it being played in the associate nation. And the rule typically is, if it's played in an associate nation, it doesn't get that designation. Only T20 domestic cricket played in a full member nation. And yet they've found a loophole.
Why the Abu Dhabi one doesn't get it, for instance.
Exactly that. The Abu Dhabi one, the Fair Break Invitational tournaments that I've been at, why they didn't get T20 status was on account of the fact that they were played in associate nations. Well, if the MLC can find a loophole to get their games in America with that, surely there's someone who can make a phone call to somebody and get this small administrative error tidied up so that the players who participated for and against Hungary in this tournament can have the T20 eyes given to them. Who does it hurt? Nobody whatsoever. So I just wanted to note that off the top. The other thing in associate land to begin with here, this is a slightly I don't know what the right term would be. It's a sadder story, but it's a nice story for associate cricket. So Joe Burns has announced on Instagram that he is going to play for Italy. Now we've kind of known this has been in the offing, and the goal is that he's going to try and get Italy to the T20 World Cup in 2026. There's a long way to go, but it's admirable that he wishes to do this. But he's framed it in this post around the tragic passing of his brother a couple of months ago, and that's taken a massive toll on him. And he explains in a lot of detail just how that has affected him as a person, of course, and as a cricketer as well, having grown up playing with his brother, only for his brother now to not be here anymore. And he's going to wear his brother's number for Italy, 85. When he wears that shirt, he's posted a photograph of that playing shirt. And he explained in the post that it's his mum's family, so his grandparents came over from Italy, and he said that it's felt like he's coming home. It's an important family thing for him to now do on behalf of both him and his brother. So we'll keep an eye on the Joe Burns story. We might get him on the podcast at some stage to talk about it. But
beautiful. Very
very best of luck to one of the really nice guys in cricket as he takes his next step in his professional journey.
Giuseppe Burns, as he will be known from now on. Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you for that update. We have some numbers to do, and we got to get into them. We're playing Nerd Pledge. It's the game that we play with the nice people on the internet who fund this program by sending in very specific amounts of a currency of their choice, and the amount relates to cricket, and we have to figure out what it means. Back on the show is Tim Vanderpump, Party Liaison, with a pledge in the euros. It is 353, very fancy. And there's a couple of bits of correspondence. There was an original clue and then a follow-up clue, if you would like to share those with the audience.
I will. I've just put on my Gibraltar cricket hat, by the way. I saw it sitting there. I'm like, given we're talking about it, and given I've been out in the rain for the 7th day in a row, and my hair's been all messy since we spoke earlier today, on goes the cricket Gibraltar cap. As I read the clue, this new one is a sum of two numbers. One, Jeff absolutely loves people celebrating. The other has been rounded to 2 decimal places because I couldn't bring myself to pledge more than €20. The two numbers have a link in a way that is very final word areas, but I'm not sure anyone's touched on it much or at all yet. And then later, I hadn't heard anyone talk about my theme by the time I made my pledge on the 3rd of June. Then on the 5th of June, you started your show with some news. The sesquicentennial test. Delighted to hear March 2027 is now in CA's calendar. The cat's out of the bag. It was 150 plus, so 150 being the number Jeff doesn't celebrate, 150th anniversary, plus 2.027 equals 353. Instead, I'd love Jeff to talk about, 2027 being the year 2027be. I see what he's done here.
Instead, I'd to make it 353. A numerical sequence I would never have figured out, by the
way. He'd like Jeff to talk about the 150s we really should be celebrating, as they're usually the biggest scores in an innings and the more likely to be match defining, or have a free swing at 353 itself, or indeed 2027. So you've got all the options in the world here for the Vanderpump, the Party Liaison.
All the options, Party Liaison. Let's do it. I'm going to talk about why 150 is bullshit to begin with. Why I have this particular feeling about 150s, because it's about sequences and the way that it feels right for them to go. I'm going to draw an analogy here. And this is going to go a bit into personal psychology. But he did say freewheel, so let's freewheel. Okay. as you would know, Adam, I'm not a person who loves exercise. I don't really, not really. I don't like the sensation of exertion. It doesn't feel good. And also, I get
a lot of people have asked me on the weekend, is Jeff going to come to Edinburgh next year and run the 10K, the half marathon? I'm like, he might come.
He might.
He might come. Is he going to run? I don't think it's likely. I mean, I'd love him to run.
I said I'll do it on a motorised esky, and I sit by that commitment. No, like I do run, and I do it grudgingly because I have to do it because it's a mental health thing where doing regular exercise is something that I need to do, which is quite unfortunate because I don't really like doing it, but I have to do it. And so somebody gave me a hand-me-down Apple Watch at one point because it has a thing in it that tells you to do this basically, and it was good psychological manipulation because I have a hyper focus kind of thing where I get stuck on one particular thing and I can't think of anything else, and that's why I don't do exercise a lot because I forget. But this thing, it makes it like a video game, right? And I had to ban myself from playing video games years ago because I would just do nothing else until I'd finished it. I just couldn't do anything else. But this thing, it measures your movement, and then it tells you how much exertion you've done, how much energy you've burned, blah, 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 and it sets targets for you, and it goes, you should do this much a day, and then it keeps a track of it, and then it builds up streaks, and then it tells you like, oh, you've hit this target 11 days in a row. It'd be a real shame if you buggered it up on the 12th, wouldn't it? And you go, oh, Christ. And it is psychological manipulation 101, but it works. It just bloody works, right? And it's annoying how effective.
Be a real shame if you missed your exercise tag.
Yeah, totally.
You're real...
Nice, nice aging body you've got here. Be a real shame if somebody were to make all of the Achilles tendons bugger up. But so it does this, and it works, and it counts. It does the streak thing, and it counts the cumulative number of days that you've done the right thing, right? And it will tell you, so you can look it up and be like, oh, I've done 63. There are 63 days on which I've met the target, kind of thing. And it counts them, and then it gives you like little animation kind of good on you, pat on the back things when you hit particular targets. But the way that the targets are set makes no sense whatsoever, right? So the first target to get to is 100, like do 100 days, which is insane when you're selling a device to people who are trying to start exercising again. You've got to ease them into this stuff, right? Like people are trying to do the right thing. You got to give them a little pat on the back after like 7 days. You got to say, okay, you've done a week's worth of exercise and good on you. And then maybe you give them another one at 30 days or something. But it doesn't do this. It starts at 100. So your first pat on the back is at 100 days, which is 3 months and a bit. That's a long period of time. The next pat on the back is at 365 days, which is an insane amount more than 100. So you get to 100 days, but then you've got to do a whole year's worth of stuff before the next time it says, hey, you've achieved an award, right? And then the third time it goes off is at 500. So you've had to add 265 days after the first one, but then 135 days until you get the third one. So you get the third one much more easily than you get the second one. This is entirely out of whack. Then the next one doesn't come until 1,000 days, which means you've got to do like 3.5 years of it before you get the next one. So you've gone 100, 365, 500, 1,000, and then after that, it does one every 250 days indefinitely, 1,250, 1,500, 1,750, and so on. It is an absolute mess. Whoever came up with this shat the bed drastically, where it should have started with smaller increments, build up towards 100, and then you do it in intervals of 100 until you reach 1,000. That would be logical, right? Like, why shouldn't you get a pat on the back at 700, 800, 900? And fine, once you hit 1,000, maybe then you go to 1,250 to 1,500 because then you're a lifer, then you're really in. Do you see why I'm so upset about this?
Yeah, I'm more interested in what you need to do to meet the benchmark. So just remind me what you need to do, like exercise every day. What constitutes exercise? Because anyone exercising at 500 days in a row is lying to you.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's more like movement. It's like kilojoules burn. So you can get it going about your regular day as long as you're active enough. It measures your walking. It measures your heart rate. So it works out what sort of exertion you're doing, and therefore how much energy that's taking. So you could be you could be sitting still, but you're on a rowing machine or something, and it will calculate that as opposed to sitting still doing bugger all because it knows when you're doing nothing.
You can get it milking a cow.
You
Matter
can
of
get
fact,
it.
I've got it now.
I've got it now. Exactly.
Okay, well, all right, fair enough. And I know where you're going to go with this by extension.
Right.
You're frustrated about your app, and therefore you're translating this through to frustration at going 50, 100, 150 because you feel like you should be a double of. It kind of counts against your point, though. I'd suggest, because you're about to say that, well, it's analogous to where you get the big recognition at 100, and you get. I don't think the recognition for 150. This is the thing that I think you've missed in your ranting before about this. The acknowledgement for 150 is more akin to what you get when you reach 50. It's nowhere near as it's an acknowledgement of a statistical feat, whereas 100 is for whatever reason. And you get to repeat the celebration on 200, and that's lovely.
Sure.
But I don't think the 150 thing is as noteworthy, not even close. I mean, very occasionally it can be if there's like a game on the line, like you're hitting a boundary to bring up your 150 and win the game. But more often than not, the 150 is just a thing that's happening along the way on the way to 200, is it not?
It is, but my issue is that bit's already happened. So 50 is polite applause. 50 is like, well done. But it's
depending on who it is and the context.
Well, sure. If it's Glenn McGrath making 50, then everybody goes nuts.
Yeah.
But generally, if you're for most players, reaching 50,
most of the time,
most players, most of the time, the 100 is the thing, and 50 says you're on your way to the possibility of making 100. It says you've done a good job so far to achieving the target, because whether it's bullshit or not, and of course, it's arbitrary that 100 is the thing, but 100 is the thing. It just is. So you're on your way to doing it. You haven't done it yet. Then you've got there. You've already got there. At that point, as a player who's already got there, you don't need the encouragement at the next bit because you've already done it. You've already achieved it. And then the only way for you to prove that you've done something even better is to do it again, to make another 100, to get your 2, get your 3, that sort of thing. It's like
if people are going nuts for 150, but if people are going nuts for 150 the way they are for 100, I think I'd come at this. The 150 is just, again, it's not anyone's fault that 150 is half of 100 and it's a nice round number. It's a function of the number being so elegant and 3 times 50 and 1.5 times 100 that it gets acknowledged in the same way that 50 does. To not acknowledge it would be really weird. To just go, oh, there's a significant number on the board, halfway to another 100. We're just going to not acknowledge it because we feel like we've done this 4 hours prior with the 50.
Yeah.
If people are going to town, I don't think, again, I really don't. Maybe one day 150s back in the day. We started the show by mentioning Say Dumwar and Gary Kirsten. 150 in a one dayer. Yeah, maybe you get up and about for that. Certainly not anymore. There was a time when people got up and about for 150s in one day. Now it's a bit
rare, I suppose.
It's not rare anymore.
No.
150 in a T20, perhaps.
I guess when I look at this, I think like maybe the most awkward, embarrassing moments in cricket history have been Brian Lara getting a round of applause on 350 a couple of times in his career. Like, by the time you're on 350, leave the guy alone. I'm not saying it's his fault.
That's a good point, though.
I'm embarrassed for the people in the crowd.
That's a good point about 250s. What about the 2? Because 250 is a pretty so I think that when I definitely remember 250s being given the same treatment as maybe 200s, or maybe not quite. That's exaggerating it. Not the same, but certainly more than a 50 or a 150.
250 is the excitement of driving towards a triple.
Yeah,
which
it's rare too, right? Fuck all times. How often does 250 happen? Never fucking happens.
Right. So, but 350, like a guy who's on 350 has nothing in his mind except trying to make 400. That's it. That's all you're doing on 350. And Lara does it once, and he fails to do it once, but both times surely that's the only thing in his mind, but I just think if you're
it was the world record with Lara the first time, wasn't it? The first time in '94 when he stood on his stumps on the same score as Sobers, when he could have easily knocked the bail off. When he went to, what did he say? He played golf that morning, didn't he? So goes the story. He was so nervous in bed about breaking Sobers' record that he went out and played 9 holes of golf before going to work. Then went out and completed the job. He was on about 3:30 going to bed.
Yeah, something like that.
Again,
so and I mean, going past the Sobers record would be much more exciting. But like getting a round of applause at 350 and then another one at 366. 366 is more important in that context. But anyway, I've probably said my piece on this. But it just, if I look at, I feel no emotional difference looking at a score of like 330 something versus 380. Like I don't care. They're in my head, they're the same thing. They're triple hundreds. And it doesn't really matter where it falls in that. It matters once you get to 400. That's when it becomes a different thing.
You've without a doubt said your piece. I urge you to move to the next thing in your answer.
Okay.
In the interest of us having any chance of getting through the show today.
I will not spend long on it, but in terms of having a great 150, I think you can have a great 150, just not because it's a 150, just because of if it does the job. And Brian Lara has the greatest 150, I reckon, the one with 153 not out in Jamaica. Kusal Pereira in Durban as well, both chasing, both 9 down, 153 not in both cases. Beautiful. Not because it's 150, but because it's enough to win the game. And so, I don't think the Gilchrist 149 not out is no different in terms of being excellent.
It's also a fuck up.
Yeah, I know.
It's also a fuck up.
I know.
Because they crossed
you're mad.
for the
I know
one.
you're exercised about it that he didn't let it go to the boundary. But to me, it makes no difference about the greatness of that innings. When say Bevan wins the game at the MCG, bringing up 100 right at the end of the game and hitting not with the winning runs because Bickle hits the winning runs, but getting that 100 right, it's winning the game and getting the 100 at the same time means something. Winning the game and getting the 150 means nothing at all, in my personal opinion. So those would be my tips for great 150s, or Neil Harvey in 1950, that tour that you talked about when Jack Moroney played when South Africa made 311 and then bowled Australia out for 75. And Neil Harvey ends up chasing 336 in the fourth innings. Did it 5 down, did it relatively comfortably in the end, but 151 not out. They'd be up there for the great 150s. But that's it. That's all I need to say about that.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you, Tim Vanderpump, for giving Jeff enough space to do with that. And I feel like he's dealt with it adequately. We can move on from it. It's good. It'll just be something that we can reference in the future without the explanation required. Second is me, Chris Lintott, 310, 3GP. 3GP? GBP. Let's go with that.
3GP.
Look, no hiding the fact that we're still recording on the Tuesday and I'm still fucking knackered. Jeff, read me my clue.
I'm going to resist doing it in a C3PO voice. Another player from my favourite county. This number refers to peak performance for a player who is still in a place of high regard around the place. It's a lot of places, but here we are.
Yes. Okay, now I've read the clue. Maybe I don't think this is correct what I'm about to say. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm about to tell you a good story anyway. GBP and a triple ton in county cricket. Fair assumption, I think, because we've had Chris Lintott do county-adjacent stuff with us before. Now, I wasn't entirely across which county that was to begin with, so part of me pondered about the 310 that was made for Northants against your team, the Freaks, by one Michael Hussey. Now, this game started on the 15th of August 2002, my 18th birthday. I don't remember an awful lot about the day I turned 18. I do remember having a bet and winning, like going to the TAB, buying a raffle, buying a Tats Lotto ticket, that kind of thing, that novelty stuff you might do when you first turn 18. The night before, actually, I forgot to put this down, but it did happen. The night before I turned 18, I think I might have mentioned this somewhere or another. If I did, stop me. The night I went to Wild Bill's nightclub in Southland and accosted a bloke who'd go on to become my boss at some point and still kind of is from time to time, Craig Hutchison, who was, I guess he was a young, thriving football reporter at the time. Why wouldn't he be at a nightclub in the middle of a week at a shopping centre? He certainly was. So I don't even know if I've told him that yet. I was the guy who was chewing his ear off that night. Anyway, I'd yet to get my P plates, or I wasn't the guy getting his P plates on his 18th birthday. That would happen a few weeks later. Went to watch Hawthorn play the next night. This was, I guess, the first time I'd ordered a pot of beer legally.
It's
and
official.
I remember we lost
Makes it official.
It's official. That's right. We lost by a kick to Richmond. I remember Greg Stafford, Richmond ruckman, scored a goal where the ball came into him like a soccer cross and he put it away, and that was the end of us that night. Anyway, in this game of cricket that I touched on before, Gloss made 422. The Freak himself made 79, Ian Harvey. And then Northants made 746 for 9 declared. Hussey opening the batting as he was through that extraordinary period of time when he averaged like 80 for Northants across 3 years. Made his 310 from 433 balls. Most of it was with Graham Swan, young Graham Swan. He made 183. The first of his 4 first-class hundreds ended up becoming his best score in first-class cricket. But then remembered that Chris was reminded that Chris is actually a Somerset fan. So we're reorienting this to another 310, and there is a belter here. So this is a story of a man who deserves the final word treatment, Harold Gimblett. Now, this is a player who had a phenomenal book written about him by David Foote, which I have seen cited before and heard referenced before, but I regret that I've not read it myself. But this did strike a chord when it became obvious that we were talking about Harold Gimblett, and it was made very clear to me that this is a book that I have to read. This is one of these guys, Jeff, who we come across sometimes who we could probably do a full episode on. We could probably do the full hour and a half or something like that. So there's no way I'm going to capture the whole yarn in 10 or 15 minutes, but I'll give you the highlights. Even with the highlights, I might miss a piece or two, but we'll see how we go. So Gimblett was born in October 1914 in Somerset. His family had been farmers in that part of the county since the 15th century. So proper Somerset boy. Sort of these weird early days as it relates to cricket. So as he was finishing school, he just wanted to play friendlies. He achieved various wild feats in these unusual teams. But it does make me ponder that a theme of this answer is going to be anxiety and depression ultimately. And whether we might have seen seeds of that as an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old didn't want to play serious cricket, didn't want to push himself, just wanted to play friendly stuff. However, he was convinced in 1935 to trial with Somerset, had a fortnight down at Taunton, and it wasn't going well. Indeed, they told him to pack his bags on the Friday. He was out of there. But on his final day of this trial, they realised that one of their amateurs had fallen ill, and they wouldn't have a full 11 to play Essex the following day unless he played for them. So he did. He was made available. And he had to race to get there with one of his teammates. They missed the bus. He effectively hitchhiked to the game on the back of a lorry. So he got there so late that they're batting first. He walks in at number 8 with the score at 107 for 6. And this begins one of the most extraordinary debuts in first-class cricket. In his second over, he takes 15 runs from the spinner and batting with the lower order, reaches 50 in just 28 minutes. Then he keeps going, makes a century in 63 minutes, the fastest of the season, back when that was a real honour and a real achievement, the fastest 100 of a county season. He achieves it in his first innings, by time when they didn't count balls properly. So he gets that honour. He ends up finishing with 123 from 175 all out, made in 80 minutes. And yes, Jeff, that's right. This is a Bannerman. A Bannerman on debut, a 70%er in his first hit in cricket for Somerset. At 8, when he'd been told a couple of days prior he wasn't going to be asked back, when he'd hitchhiked there on the back of a lorry, he records this staggering innings. He achieves what's described as celebrity status straight away. Yeah. Jack Hobbs writes a newspaper column about him. There are newspaper snappers all over the family farm. It's like, who is this prodigy? Where's this boy come from kind of thing? As you'd expect, something like that happens, and it is going to generate plenty of headlines. And so it did for Harold in 1935. Then his next game, he's scheduled to play at Lord's. They bat him at 8 again. And in a loss, he top scores and makes 53, and all the media are there, and he's generating all this attention about himself. The season does fall away for him towards the end of 1935, but at the start of 36, they repurpose him as an opener. And against the touring Indians to begin their season in England, he makes 103 and 46 in a huge win against the touring international team. The next week, he makes 93 and 160 against Lancashire. He's hot property. He's irresistible. And he's picked for England from fucking nowhere, right? Where he was a year before, not even a year before, when he was sacked from the only place he'd ever trialled at, never really played competitive cricket. Now he's playing a test match at Lord's against the Indians. And after England banked a first innings deficit, they had about 120 odd to win the test match on a sticky dog. And he hit a very quick 67 not out to change the energy of the chase and to win the test. So he's had a very good start to his test career. The good times continue to roll. However, he missed out in his second test match at Old Trafford, and this included him dropping a catch, apparently a very easy catch. And this became like a symbol of who this guy was, that he wasn't serious enough or something along those lines, the way he played the game in a cavalier way. And they didn't pick him for the Australian trip in 1936-37, all on the back of one fucking match.
Right.
But he even with this,
might have been handy in the biggest choke in history to have him around.
That's Kind of what I was thinking too. So this omission was devastating to him, but also a relief. The quote is, "Thank goodness that is over." And he said he'll never play at that level again. He just hated it, hated the extra scrutiny, despite having one good test match and one bad test match. And he does fall away for a couple of years. We were talking earlier about the experience that James Bracher had in 2 test matches to start his career and taking 3 years to recover. Basically the same here with Harold Gimblett.
Well,
it takes him until 1939.
You see a lot of players get wrecked from having a test or two, particularly when it doesn't work out.
Yeah, and so it was for Gimblett. So it takes until 1939 to get his mojo back. And does he ever? Strikes 5 tons in a row in 5 matches to get going. And they pick him for the first test of the summer. Again, this idea that he's special.
Yeah.
And when he was in form, they pick him, right? And at Lords against the Windies, he opens the batting with Hutton, who'd overtaken him by this point, clearly, because he was ahead of Hutton, because Hutton's a young man when he comes onto the scene and makes the 100 the year before. But he's opening with him. He makes 22 in the first innings and 20 in the second innings when they're chasing quick runs. At one stage, he hits a 4 and 6 in consecutive deliveries just to kind of remind people that he's a real thrasher. But they drop him anyway, so dropped back in the team, straight back out again. And then World War II, and that, like it is for so many cricketers, is where the story ends for the time being with him as an international player. One note here is after that 1936 drop catch, takes a blinder to get rid of Everton Weekes, which I guess is something to go with. That he redeemed himself on that front, if nothing else. During the war, he goes into the RAF initially, but he gets deployed to the fire service. He's working in areas that were heavily bombed during World War II. And by the time the war is complete, remembering he's born in 1914. So what is he by the time we're out of it? He's 31 at the other end of the war. And he's ready to serve Somerset again as a senior player. And has a terrific season in 1947. His best individual season by average. Topped the list with a 50 average, which for him was a high watermark. 7 centuries in that run as well. Then in 1948, the team were fucked. They only made 4 centuries in the whole year. He got all of them, which gives a sense of how badly they were going. And this includes our number, 310 at Eastbourne against Sussex in 1948. So Sussex get 434, and in reply, Somerset rack up 584, with Gimblett's 310 taking 465 minutes and containing 37 fours and 2 sixes. In the process, he overtook the highest score for Somerset to that point, which was made by Lionel Palariet, who we've talked about on the pod before. He was known as another beautiful stroke player. He was an amateur, though, who'd gone through the sort of Oxford University school. And apparently, as he went past 292, Gimblett said, "Well, that's got rid of one amateur's name in our county's record books," which is quite sharp from someone who played in a lot of gents versus players games by this point. They were going to do a collection for him for the triple ton, and then the secretary said no. And this reflects, I think, a bit of a theme here with these strained relations between him and the club. So, I mean, he keeps going anyway. 1949, he hits his first 2,000 run season, 2,093 runs. Bearing in mind he's 35 by this point. That's the Somerset record. No one had made 2,000 in a year to that point. It included twin centuries against Hampshire. Then in 1950, his Indian summer, if you like, was continuing to such an extent. He started the season so well. And remember that in 1950, there's Ramadan and Valentine who are taking England down at the start of the summer. They lose at Lords in stunning circumstances. And what they thought they needed for the Trent Bridge Test match, the third in the series, was someone just to mess with the rhythm of the West Indian spinners. They thought, who better? Let's get Harry back, Harold Gimblett back. Let's get him back. He messes with spinners. Let's see how he goes. So they pick him. 11 years after his third Test match, in 1939, he's selected. And this news captivates the nation. That as a guy who by this point is in the second half of his 30s, not played since his mid-20s, there's been a world war between times. Somerset are all the way down the bottom of the table. Remember, they had 4 years in a row finishing last year. I'm sure it's someone else's fault, by the way, they kept finishing last. But they said, we want him back. However, just before the match, there was a large boil on the back of his neck, and they had to treat it with penicillin. And they said that the travel from Taunton or from Somerset to Trent Bridge was too risky, and as a consequence of that, he didn't get to play the game.
Didn't
get to play the game after all that.
What year was that?
1950.
They wouldn't have even had penicillin yet. It's discovered penicillin in 53.
Okay, well, maybe it was a precursor to penicillin. Maybe I've misread this. But the point is that whatever they injected him with, they just thought the risk was too high.
Huh.
So he didn't play a test match. He did play a Commonwealth. Yeah. Kept out by a ball. Kept out by Trevor Bailey. The Boyle. So he does keep playing, though. Like, despite the
justice, it feels wrong.
I know. There's a lot of shit that feels wrong about this career and about this story. I tell you what. So, yeah, in 1950, after all this, Willie won't he? They don't pick him again. It was just like this one-off thing because they get their shit together, don't they?
Yeah, well, they do.
At least by the end of the series,
kick the ball away forever. Cowdrey and May sort of thing, or whatever it is.
And then he gets he plays for a Commonwealth team all over the subcontinent and so on in the winter of 1950-51. He gets his only century that isn't for Somerset. But being away from home didn't treat him well. He lost a stack of weight, and he really struggled with his mental health over there. In 1951, he stepped away for a bit of time, but then he comes back in 1952, and Somerset is shit. This is another one of these runs where they're bottom for 4. This was in the run where they're bottom for 4 years, sorry. But they give him a benefit year, but even that angers him because the benefit match where they raise all the money, they play it at Glastonbury, not the festival, but at the ground, the outground. That would have been funny had Harold Gimblett played
main stage.
He headlined the played the pyramid stage, played the Legend set on the Sunday night with Elton John. But no, he wanted them to have it against Gloucestershire, their rivals, and they would have made more money that way. But maybe there was a reason they fucked him. Maybe they didn't like him, and the benefit was this was a strategic effort to lower the amount of money that he would get from it. But anyway, this leads towards this resentment. But he does well enough in 1952, one of his really strong seasons, that he's made a member of the Wisden 5 Cricketers of the Year in 1953 with a bunch of gun cricketers, including Stuart Surridge. So that's a nice bit to this. In that year, he hits 167 against Northants, the 50th of his first-class tons. That's a nice milestone for someone who had such a hot and cold career, I suppose. Although I say hot and cold, he reached 1,000 runs every year, but not the kind of player who was a banker as much as he was a guy who got hot and really delivered when he did. At this point, he signed a 5-year deal with Somerset to take him well into his 40s, having had a really, really good 1952. But this is where it goes horribly wrong. Depression takes over. He's institutionalized and subject to electroshock therapy ahead of the 1954 season, I think we're into by here. And they say in the foot book, which is summarized in an article I was reading, that his obsessions took over about money, about class, about how he'd been done over at different points. And he was taking stacks of pills every day, and it was just deteriorating. So he did come back in 1954 after the electroshock therapy, but he wasn't able to really play. Then he came to watch later in the year, and he was ordered to leave the ground. So clearly it had been a rough time in 1954 for him. This is part of a full breakdown, which we now would identify more clinically and more medically, whereas back then it was seen as I guess it was seen in a different kind of way. It was very much it for him as a player. Just some numbers for you, Jeff. Hit 265 sixes, which is surely the most ever for an opener. I can't think of there be an opener who's hit more than 260. Certainly at the time it was. Maybe now with bigger bats, but I can't imagine there's an opener who's hit more sixes than that in first class cricket. Often the first ball of the match, although that's more anecdotal, I think, about him liking to hit the first ball of a match for 6. 23,000 runs at 36, 50 100s, and even 50 on that front. He did go to work at Millfield for 20 years with Jack Meyer, Rollo, who I've done an answer on before, the man who started the Millfield School, who was a colleague of his at Somerset. So he did work there for 20 years helping run the cricket team, but he did deteriorate to the point where in 1978 he overdosed on pills and killed himself and left a widow and a son, and died at 63. So yeah, it's a sad story in some respects, but his brilliance was clear to see. You go back to the very start, the fact that what he was able to achieve in that stunning debut back in at the very start in 1935, the very odd patchy test career, the comeback that nearly was, the triple ton in the middle of all of that. It's an amazing story. Chris Lintott, I'm going to hope that this is who you were going with, although I'm less sure when it says here who's still in a place of high regard around the place. So I don't know what that would relate to. So maybe it isn't right after all. But I'm glad we did the story anyway of Harold Gimblett rather, and that was what we're going with for 310.
Well, it's a start anyway, because I think it sounds like there's a lot more in that story that, well, we need to read the book first and then go from there.
Probably.
There's a large stack of reading. There's a long story time reading list that builds up every week, because we find bits of these stories without having the full thing. We're going to have a break. We're going to also remind you, if you want to get your discount on your VPN, you can get that via us, particularly if you're doing what we're doing, traveling. Don't let your paid subscriptions go to waste. Access your home content while traveling over 6,000 servers in 61 countries. You just find the server closest to you, and then you get the best VPN speed. That's how it works. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, you go to nordvpn.com/TFW, 30-day money-back guarantee. You help support the show. You get a fat discount. Nothing to lose.
Yeah, pick your best deal there. And as you say, the 30-day money-back guarantee is attractive. A lot of people will be thinking about their summer holidays this time of year. I know we are. We're like, when can we block in some time away with the kids and whatever else? And that often is when you need a VPN, right? It's when you're away and doing something different where you ordinarily wouldn't be. So go with nordvpn.com/TFW. On the other side of the break, much more on Storytime 187. Storytime 187, Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon with ya.
Yep.
Westfield competition also with ya. Jeff, just to recap on that so quickly, this is out of the weekly show, the Westfield 50 quid voucher. Every single weekly app now, everyone through the World Cup. And all you need to do is answer the question that's in the show note link and Westfield app. I've explained that poorly. Download the app. Download the Westfield app. That's what you need to do. You have the chance to win the 50 quid voucher. And if you win that, you go into a subsequent draw to win the big whole shebang thing where they're going to look after you at Sixers.
I think it's not just if you've
Everyone
won
goes in.
Yeah, so if you've won the 50, you still go into the other draw. But even if you didn't, you also go into the big draw. So you can win the cricket party. Yeah, that is fair. You don't want you don't want to create a kind of Tory system where people who have everything are the only ones who get more stuff. That's not what we're about here.
Quite right. So download the Westfield app and get amongst it. Jeff, time for you to get amongst it again. We aren't blessed with loads of time today. Go for it.
Here we go. Joe Bracher. I'm always unsure whether I should do a soft CH, Joe. I'm sorry. I know you've told me before, but it was a long time ago, and we have a lot of people's names. So I'm just going to front up on that one. I can't remember if it's a ch or a k.
Okay. Well, let's go with k. Joe Bracher. 811 GBP. He's been with us before. He's got a clue for you. A hero growing up, a number about what could have been, and if they were playing today, they'd be earning millions in franchise cricket. If you've already talked lots about this player, you were also invited to free will however you'd like. Nice.
Well, I'm pretty sure Joe is a Surrey follower because we met at the Oval Test, if my memory serves correctly. 811 with a potential connection to T20. There is an IPL connection. Virat Kohli averaged 81.1 in his Annus Mirabilis in 2016 when he made 973 runs at a strike rate of 152, which is about 9 and over. Too slow. He's too slow, Kohli. Made 400s. RCB didn't win. Business as usual. But this is somebody who didn't get to play in the IPL, presumably, because they didn't make a lot of money from it. So, all right, if we went for a little diversion to the 1800s, Surrey's biggest ever score was 811. 811 is our score. Bobby Abel made 357. We've talked about it on the show before. Hit 38
Come
balls
up
in
last
the 6.
week. Well, why was I talking about Bobby Abel's 357 the other? I mean, I was talking about it in the last week or two.
Yep.
Probably on Surrey commentary. I don't. Oh, you know what it would have been? The 811 when Gloucestershire made their highest score ever. That would have been the link, I'm sure.
Yes. So this was about Surrey's highest score. It could be. You could argue that Bobby Abel would have been a great T20 player, 38 fours and a 6 in that 357. But I would say if Bobby Abel was Joe's cricket hero growing up, then Joe is more awesome than even we had imagined. So I don't think that's going to be it. 1895, Surrey faced 81.1 overs against Leicestershire. They got bowled out by Dick Power and Art Woodcock. What a combination. And if you go back further to 1855, having made 163 and conceded 211 against Sussex, Surrey in the third innings faced 81.1 overs, that number again, 811, And in that time, Adam, they scored 75 all out. What a game. Wish I was there. The principal bowler doing the damage there was John Wisden, who took 6 for in both innings. And his partner opening the bowling, who was also opening the batting, was James Dean. And batting for Surrey and top scoring in the first innings was Julius Caesar. Yes, that was his real name. I'm pretty sure Norcross has mentioned Julius Caesar on the show before as well. His brother was Ben Caesar, and his dad was Fred Caesar, but he was Julius. That's just how it worked. So none of that is going to be the answer. We're looking for a Surrey hero growing up with some T20 promise that didn't quite arrive. It feels like Ali Brown. It feels because he would, you know the story. One of the biggest hitters ever.
Well, this is it. Ali Brown is seen as that guy who, had he just, the clue sums it up nicely, had he been a bit older, given what he achieved with the 268, the record, and Mike Kaspovich playing in that game and still taking him down. And, there's the 268 bar now at the Oval. And he did play one-day international cricket for England. He did make 100 against India at Lords, I'm pretty sure, but just didn't have that that chance to turn into the star that they expected that he would. And admittedly, that international career is before the record-breaking run he went on in white ball cricket. But still, it's one of those names that people of a certain era are obsessed with.
Yes, and when you say a bit older, you mean born a bit later, because he's born in 1970, so he's 54 now, which means he did actually play a fair bit of T20 cricket in England. He played 79 games across the first 8 seasons because he didn't finish up until 2011, 10 or 11. So he made over 1,700 T20 runs, scoring them at quite a modern strike rate of 150. That was mostly for Surrey and a bit for Notts in the last couple of seasons. So, he's done in 2010. He's 40 years old, which means he doesn't get involved in those first couple of seasons of the IPL when he would have been playing at the same time as it was still going on. But classic kind of hitter, batted in the middle order in first-class cricket, opened in white ball, and 2002, the game where he makes 268, that famous score, while Ian Ward makes 97 at the other end, they put on 286, and then when Ward gets out, Ali Brown keeps going almost to the end of the innings. The score's on 431 when he gets out. It ends up at 438, the same as South Africa would make a few years later against Australia. And we've talked about this match on the show before, about how Glamorgan came out and decided nothing to lose, and they very nearly ran it down. They made 429, but that innings wasn't a one-off. So Ali Brown at that point, he'd already made 203 in a 50-over game from 119 balls a few years earlier. He went on to make a 176 from 97 balls, 157 from 117 in a 40-over match. First-class cricket, he had a 295, a 265, a 215, and he was a proper first-class player. He played 17 first-class seasons for Surrey and 3 for Notts. So nearly 17,000 first-class runs, 11,000 List A runs, put his T20 numbers in there. That's 20,000 professional runs thereabouts. So,
and the rest,
he was.
It would have been 30.
Oh, sorry, 30. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. I'm not quite that bad at maths yet, but he's better than people remember him, I suppose, as that guy could hit a few dingers in white ball cricket. So the 268 lasted until 2 years ago, and you'll remember when this happened, when Tamil Nadu played Arunachal Pradesh, a state who probably shouldn't have the kind of List A first class status. There's that issue with so many teams in Indian domestic cricket that those down towards the bottom don't have the resources to compete. So Arunachal Pradesh is the last of the states as you go out into that Seven Sisters region. So in the eastern part of India, you come up towards Nepal, and then Bangladesh is coming up from the south, and there's a tiny little sort of arm of land that goes around the top of Bangladesh and then reaches down the other side towards Burma and towards the Bay of Bengal. And that's where the small states that get named as the Seven Sisters all cluster in that region. And right up the back is Arunachal Pradesh. It's pretty much China by that point. It's up right up in the mountains. So a team from there has played List A cricket 38 times officially. They've won 5 of those games. All of them are against other small states in that region. So they haven't been competitive is the short version. They've conceded 300 or more a bunch of times. They've been bowled out for under 100 a bunch of times. Their best score against anyone who's not a team equally as bad as them and nearby is 234. They get beaten up by good sides. And the worst was this one from Tamil Nadu a couple of years ago, who made 506 for 2 and then bowled out the home team for 71. The opening stand was 416. Your mate Sai Sudarshan made 154. He was the first to fall. And at the other end, Narayan Jajadisan was the wicketkeeper who went on to 277 before he was out in the 42nd over. So he had 8 overs left he could have faced. Could have comfortably been a triple at that point, but
didn't want it enough. It's the only time anyone's gone past Ali Brown, who, as you said, did get a couple of brief goes at England one-day cricket. He'd be a shoe-in now. They'd definitely pick him with his style. But I think he wasn't sure of it. His attacking style, like people would take the piss out of him for trying it. It was that kind of era where he got talked down for being too aggressive. And so he's on debut. He's kind of awkward. He makes 36, but he makes it slowly. He's batting with Michael Atherton, who's 13 off 31. It's a difficult era, sort of in the 90s, to know what you're doing in one-day cricket. It was also apparently the first international in England played on the new worldwide standard of 50 overs a side with a break between innings. That was his debut. So he has that. Used to be until then it was they'd play a full day of cricket and they'd still break for lunch and tea, and it's a quirk that people forget that one day cricket for a long time was not standardised at all.
Yeah. I don't even remember that really being a thing. So he's got that awkward first innings. He makes a duck in his second game, and then he has his best moment when he makes his century for England. And as we started out with our number being 811, I think it's not unreasonable to say his 100 that he made was 118, and his career strike rate after that innings was 81.1. There we go. There's a speculative punt.
I like it. Perfecto. Joe, thank you for being with us for a long time now. Our last number today is for me, Matt Bracher, 119, appropriately. Matt Bracher. I got to say, Matt has been such a force for good on all things marathon. This is a guy who can run and does run 3-hour marathons and ultra marathons as well. And, in his academic time, he's a fucking rocket scientist. So this guy's got serious game. Which makes me somewhat daunted to take this on. Jeff, the clue?
It is Bannerman areas, but not in the usual way, 119.
Yeah. So in a way, it's straightforward. But when I probably double faked myself out of this, I'm like, oh shit, if it's Matt, it's probably quite complex. But no, it's not in the end. So and it is appropriate that we're rounding out these series of shows about the Lord's Tabs and the marathon fundraising that Matt's been such a big part of with an answer that's his. So first of all, we had a look at where 119 fits as a relation to other numbers in the Bannerman context. And look, we didn't get anywhere. But what I would say is that 119 out of 200 is not a bad one to look at ever so quickly. It's when New Zealand played Pakistan in Dhaka in 1969. So there's quite a bit riding on this. New Zealand were 1-0 going into the third and final test. They make 273 in the first innings. A Glenn Turner ton, of course, naturally. Mark Burgess, 59. Remember that name for later. Then Pakistan take a first innings lead, 290 for 7, declared. Interesting. New Zealand all out 200 in the second dig. Burgess 119 not out. So no one apart from Turner got beyond 26 apart from him. A 59.5%. So a mighty effort. No Bannerman, but the highest percentage for anyone that's gotten even 119. It left Pakistan 184, and it was all over when they shook hands at 51 for 4, which is a shame in a way because it was set up for a great finish. Another way of interpreting it is what a triumph for New Zealand, having gone to England and India. They get to Pakistan, and it is their first ever series win. It took them 30 attempts and 40 years to get their first outright series win, and so it was in Pakistan in 1969-70. Now, remembering that it wasn't really Pakistan for much longer because there was the Liberation War in 1971. So Bangladesh and Dhaka don't host another test match until 2000 when they get full member status. There was a time when, as we know, Pakistan did play in what became later on the capital of Bangladesh. As for Burgess, 50 test matches for 5 centuries, a couple of years as captain. late in the 1970s, but his finest hour was there in Dakar when he got New Zealand their first series win. So a great little yarn on the way in, but not right. Went back to Matt, who gave me a little bit more and said, I need to go more base than that. It's a more simple reason. It's Bannerman areas for that simple other reason. And, what does Bannerman represent other than being, the number 67.35? Also got the first 100 in Test cricket, right? So what about the spin on this being that the first woman to get a Test match 100 and ding, 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 spot on. Myrtle McLagan. Now, before I talk about her 100, I want to talk about the first Test in women's cricket because this is quite the thing. First Test, 90th anniversary this year, the 28th to the 31st of December 1934, contains one of the all-time great individual efforts, and it's by Myrtle. Australia all out 47, Myrtle McLagan, who bowled the first ball in women's Test cricket. Bannerman faced it, she bowled it. Another nice little link there. Ends up with the figures of 17 overs, 11 maidens, 7 for 10. The person that bowled the first ball in Test cricket took 7 for 10. So it's still the fifth Test ever. There were 2 8-fors and there have been 2 7 for 6s, one of which is Betty Wilson, one that you've done before, Jeff. But, cop that. Test cricket starts, England's first bowler, opening bowler, 7 for 10. Then she faces the first ball and makes 72 out of 154. Open the bowling and the batting for England in the first Test match the women ever played.
Just like James Dean in 1855.
Yeah. A little 46.7%er if you're interested. No one else over 32. And in the second dig, 28 overs done for 31. So all her luck went when taking the 7 for Mary Spear took 5. It took Australia 125 overs to be bowled out for 138. They were set 34. Sadly, for the purpose of this answer, Myrtle McLagan was out to none other than Peggy Antonio, who my daughter is not really, but kind of sort of named after, for 9. So she didn't get to hit the winning runs. Daniel's favourite, Betty Snowball, had that honour. Not 119, though. Let's just quickly divert through to her life for a sec for Myrtle. Born on the 2nd of April 1911 in what was then British India. She's quite posh. Went to the Royal School in Bath. And she was coached with her off-spin by Titch Freeman.
Oh.
That was her teacher at school. By that point, he was retired, and I assume retired. Well, maybe not quite retired, but nevertheless, he was working at the Royal School in Bath. And at one point, she took 5 wickets in 5 balls in a school game. So she was well and truly set. So that provides some context around what she did. Now, the second Test the women played in that series of 34-35 was in Sydney. Australia 162. Of course, Myrtle's all over it again. 33 overs, 22 maidens, 4 for 33. Doesn't like giving up runs. Then in her innings with the bat, gets 119 out of 301 for 5 declared. So again, open the bowling, open the batting. In her first Test, 7 for 10 and 72. In the second Test, 4 for 33, followed by the first ever women's century. Australia were all out 148 in the second innings. She gets 2 more wickets there, 6 for the match, and gets the winning. Doesn't quite last for the winning runs. And by that, I mean, she didn't come into open. I don't know why she didn't come into open. She was scheduled to bat 5 in the second dig, and it was taken care of elsewhere. But that is our number, 119 from Matt Bracher. The third Test was a draw. But predictably, Myrtle gets 50 and 4 for another great performance to end an incredible series. 253 runs at 50 and 20 wickets at 8.5 for the opening bowler and opening batter. The English men had lost the Ashes at home in 1934, and with the English women winning 2-0, the Morning Post responded to the newspaper by having a poem in their rag. What matter that we lost? Mere nervy men. Since England's women now play England's game, wherefore, immortal wisdom, take your pen and write McLagan on the scroll of fame. There you go. Nice. So a little poem in the paper to recognise her individual efforts. In 1937, they were her next Test matches against Australia. She made another 100 against them when they came back for the return visit. That was at Blackpool, which I know Jeff is a ground that we've been talking about a little bit lately. Yep. Made 89 not out at Northants against the Australians as well. Once again, the dominant player. But much as it was when we were talking earlier about Harold, then war breaks out when she's 28, which is right at the peak of her powers. She's an officer in the territorial services during the war, which is actually her main career. She goes back and joins the military again after the war as well. But between times, tours Australia in 48-49, captains against Australia for a couple of Test matches in 1951, went back to the army. Hey, and how's this? In 1963, when she's 52, her last game against the touring Australians was 81 not out, so she kept going all the way through. In 1966, she was awarded an MBE for services to the army rather than services to cricket. And she had so many people, nice little last bit here, so many people came to her 80th birthday in 1992 that she had to climb up a ladder and start blowing a whistle to get their attention to shut up and let her speak, which I think is a nice thing. She actually did pass away not long after that in 1993 in her home county of Surrey, the first superstar of the England women's cricket team in that first series, 7 for 10, the first half century, the first player of the match, the first ton, 1,000 test runs and a bowling average of 16. Myrtle McLagan, what a fucking star. And she'll be, I'm certain, who Matt Bracher is talking about with his 119 and the Bannerman areas. There you go.
Very good. I'm glad. I'm glad that she was the one. And yeah, I remember that chastening first test. It's sort of part of what lights the fire under Peggy Antonio, who goes on to produce a couple of great performances against England in the next few that she plays.
Jeff, I think that's where we're going to have to leave today's show, but it's been a fun one with a few new numbers. There's going to be a lot more coming when we're in America. So the Discord channel is just heaving after what happened at Edinburgh this week. There's no better time to get involved in all the stuff that we do on the show. I mentioned on the weekly, we've got cricket tours coming up, the games in Australia, the meetups, the live watch along for the World Cup final, which we'll be doing. I'll be attending that, which will be at one of the two Westfields. Haven't quite worked out where yet, but we're doing a watch along for that and this wonderful community that you can be part of as well. Patreon.com/thefinalword. Get you direct access to Discord. You can get the ad-free feed as a consequence as well. Am I missing anything, Jeff?
I think that's it. All that remains is to say farewell, and we'll see you at the World Cup.
See you in America. Have nice weekends.